And welcome to Your Voice, Your Future. I'm your moderator, Armstrong Williams. Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King lost their youngest son today in his valiant battle against prostate cancer. He was 62 years old. He died in Malibu with his wife by his side. And Bernice and her brother, Martin Luther King Jr., is just another tragedy in the King family. Our hearts goes out to the King family and their great loss, and all of those who've lost loved ones to today. You're in our prayers. And thank you so much for joining us for this edition. Colin, Byrd, Kimberly, Klacik, Edwin Avent, and Alex Newman are in the house. They're our guests. So, a little riddle. I'll start with you, Alex. A little politics here. So, Senator Tim Scott is now engaged. He just, with all his might, endorsed Donald Trump, showing no gratitude to Nikki Haley for putting him in that seat after Jim DeMint decided to step down. Didn't even mention her name. And so I began to wonder, engaged? Forcefully endorsing Trump? Is he the leading candidate as his VP? What do you think, Alex? I think there's something there.
Very good question. And I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility. They did seem to have a pretty cordial relationship throughout the campaign. He dropped out early and never really delivered any very strong criticisms like some of those. We all know Donald Trump really bristles at criticism and remembers those things for a long time. And I think him and Tim Scott got along pretty well. I've also heard rumors that Ben Carson is one of the leading potential contenders. So I think it'll be interesting, and we'll probably know in the not too distant future.
You know, Kimberly, Nathan Wade's wife referred to Fannie Willis in court today as his paramour. Now, we know what that means.
Yes.
You know, and everyone is writing that the latest with Miss Willis and Mr. Wade may turn this Trump interference election case upside down. Could it be tossed out? Could she be disbarred? Could she be removed from the case? What's the significance?
Well, I think that, all those possibilities are in the air. Now, I will say that I don't think they're going to dismiss the case, but she could be disbarred and she could be removed from the case. And if obviously there's an improper relationship, which we might find out soon.
Oh, no, there was an improper relationship.
Well,
let's be clear. There was an improper relationship.
Yes, but we're going to see the records shortly, right? The divorce records.
The records were unsealed today.
Unsealed,
Everybody
yes.
has access to them, including me, and I read them before coming over.
Okay, so I have not read them as of yet,
Yes,
so I will get home and I'll do that this evening. But once we take a look at them, and I guess you have, it's a great possibility that she'll be dismissed from this case. But also, I have other questions. Honestly, when we're talking about these vacations, we're talking about all this money that went to Nathan Wade's hand. I mean, where did a lot of this money come from? Who will then be held accountable for that? I want more than just having her removed from the case. I want heads to roll.
You know, let me raise this question. It's kind of fascinating. You know, people love writing about the private lives of individuals. You know, I think what people do in their bedroom is their business. But I do believe this, Edwin, that if you are the attorney for Fulton County and you're selecting your prosecutor, and there was much criticism about his selection, I don't think you use the judgment to give that position, and I don't care who it is, to anyone that you're sleeping with. But my point is large. Is it not that, is it just affected everybody? They just forget about their oath of office, the responsibility and the commitment to their ethics, and the position of power that they place themselves in, that she did not realize that something like this could come up that could totally jeopardize cases. Because I think of all the cases against Donald Trump, this case has real teeth to it. And yet, people in power today, people accuse them of being greedy, all these liaisons. What's happening to the moral leadership in this nation?
Well, you know, that's a good question, Armstrong. You know, oftentimes I think about why do people even run for office and take these positions, because they're thankless jobs. You know, your personal life becomes everybody's business. And so you really do have to think about this long and hard before you put yourself in public service. And so I think we probably miss out on the best people that could do these jobs, because people with the talent, people with the intellect, people with the integrity to do these jobs don't want to be dragged through the mud. They don't want their background to be exposed. And so sometimes, you know, people, everybody in all these positions are human beings. They have feelings, they have emotions, they have, you know, they have relationships, and sometimes they're improper. And wrong time, wrong place, and it happens all across the board, you know, in every city, state, nationally. These type of, you know, unfortunate situations are happening far too often, and like I said, I think it drives really good people away from even pursuing the opportunity.
You know, Colin, I was watching Ron DeSantis endorse Donald Trump. I don't know anybody who has said worse things about an individual than what Donald Trump said about Ron DeSantis throughout this election cycle. I remember Ted Cruz and what Donald Trump said about Ted Cruz and Ted Cruz's wife, and yet they endorsed him. And yet Ron DeSantis was on Sunday kissing his. I gotta tell you, for me, I couldn't do that.
You couldn't do that?
I could not endorse Donald Trump if he talked about me the way. And I mean, these things are so. I can't do it. But I guess. And then you got Nancy Mace, who supported his impeachment, and yet she endorsed him today. What is it about politics that we don't seem to understand? How can you allow somebody to humiliate you, talk about your wife, call her ugly, and you can still endorse him? Help me understand that.
And you just said a small fraction of the many individuals who have had a turnabout and about face, who have flip-flopped. Look, flip-flopping is the name of the game in politics. There's also another important political saying, and that is there are no permanent friends and there are no permanent enemies. I've seen the best of friends turn into the best of enemies. I've seen the best of enemies turn into the best of friends in politics. And so I think what happens is those alliances are based on the interests of the moment. And right now, Trump is on fire. He just dominated in Iowa. So not only do you have Ted Cruz endorsing, not only do you have Tim Scott endorsing, not only do you have Ron DeSantis endorsing, you got Marco Rubio. The list goes on of individuals who said, I was never Trump, and now they're all for him. And there's a deal that they have either with him or with his voters that's either spoken or unspoken about what they want to get out of endorsing him. But it's nothing like also acknowledging the fact that a lot of times in politics, you go with the winner. And, you know, it's kind of like boxing. I remember when Don King's fighter was losing, then he ended up at the ring with the other fighter by the end of the fight. And so that's kind of what's going on here.
Good analogy. You know, here's what I want to bring up, Alex. People really believe that everything is over, as they would say in church, except the shouting. And I would say in Donald Trump's case, except putting the crown on his head. And this is why Trump wants Nikki Haley out of the race, because he don't want to spend any more money, and he wants to be crowned. But there is a mindset, Alex, that Donald Trump is dangerous to democracy. Now, I know we've heard Bernie Sanders say this. We've heard President Joe Biden say this. But there are many Republicans that feel the same way. They believe that Donald Trump gets the nomination. Of course, his base is solid. Suburban women are not sure. And then you have the independents. There's a calculus that no one's talking about that don't see a pathway for Donald Trump defeating Joe Biden. Now, it's clear in all polls, Nikki Haley would defeat Donald Trump hands down in a general election. Donald Trump is flawed. His legal woes are not going anywhere. So is he a shoo-in? Does Nikki Haley still have life? She can do well in New Hampshire, a little decent in South Carolina because the big money is behind her because they just don't want to take a chance with flawed Donald Trump, and he is flawed.
Well, you're right about the big money being behind Nikki Haley. There's no question about that. For a time, it was behind Ron DeSantis, and now it's behind Nikki Haley. And I think that's precisely why, or at least one of the many reasons why Donald Trump voters will stick with him no matter what happens. Come hell or high water, they're voting for Donald Trump. I know the media is putting out a lot of polls right now trying to convince Republicans that Nikki Haley has a better shot at defeating Joe Biden than Donald Trump. Frankly, I think if we had an honest election that everything was above board, it really wouldn't be a question. In fact, I'd be very impressed if Joe Biden had really any level of serious support. So at this point, I think if we had an honest election without all the mail-in stuff, without the questions about the machines, I think you could put up pretty much any Republican and he or she would dominate in the general election, regardless of what Joe Biden says. But, I think Nikki Haley is pretty much the last-ditch effort of the establishment to try to stop Donald Trump. It looks to me like it's going to be absolutely futile. The same thing is going to happen to Nikki Haley as just happened with Ron DeSantis and happened with so many before, because Donald Trump has a stronghold, an iron grip over the base of the Republican Party grassroots, and that's true in every little town in this country, even in the big cities. Yeah, a lot of establishment Republicans, a lot of rhinos, and a lot of people in Washington, D.C. don't like him, but out in flyover country, he is a superstar, and a lot of people see him as the last hope to turn around what seems to be the terminal decline of this country.
Alex Newman twice used the term honest election. Wow, we've got to explore that when we come back. But we also have to talk about that 5-4 decision by the Supreme Court today telling Governor Abbott, you got to cut the wire. And it was close. Tension. They overruled the lower court. So much to talk about on Your Voice, Your Future. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back. So, Kimberly, that 5-4 razor decision, how do you interpret it? Well, there's only one way to interpret it. He's got to cut the wire.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because, as we talk about Israel having the right to defend itself, I wish we had the right to defend ourselves at our southern border, because right now I feel like we're being invaded. And, Governor Greg Abbott's doing the best he can. Obviously, this administration wants to continue to allow the flow of illegal migrants. And let's be very clear, these are criminals that are crossing our border. I know a lot of times we'll hear about the fact that there are women and there are children, but yes, this is criminal activity. And we don't have the resources. We cannot sustain this. You hear lots of people in Chicago, New York City, other cities that are talking and speaking out because of all of those that are now going into their cities as well, because they're sanctuary cities. So we're doing the best we can. I feel bad for Governor Greg Abbott. I don't know if he can appeal this decision. I don't know what legal action they can take. I'm obviously not an attorney, but something needs to happen, and I hope the voters are really watching so they can make the right decision in November.
Edwin, you run a school, a collegiate school for boys. I think you're doing extraordinary work. Mm-hmm. When you think about, we're here in Baltimore, you think about the crisis in the classroom, not just Baltimore, it's Washington, D.C., it's all across the country. I think sometimes we need to put the pause button on and talk about what it is we can do where we are to make a difference, to make America better. So talk about what you've learned from the school that you founded and how we can empower our young men so they don't lead themselves into a line of crime, sexual trafficking, homicide, and they have the best shot at what we consider still a piece of the American dream.
Well, Armstrong, all of those things you just pointed out were the things that motivated me, because myself, my career has always been in media, whether it was magazines or helping launch television networks, but I always cared about young boys in cities like Baltimore and Philadelphia, where I grew up, boys who were getting caught up in crime, murder, going to jail. The thing that I discovered as I looked at it over the course of time, the thing that was in common with mostly all the boys, whether they went to jail or they died in the street, was they were illiterate. It's a high level of illiteracy. So most of these guys, if you look at who's in jail, 85% don't read above a 3rd grade level. And so my solution is then we got to do a better job of educating our young men. And I didn't think that, you know, a lot of public schools, not just here in Baltimore, but across the country, weren't doing the work that needed to get done to reach these young men. And so I helped to found Baltimore Collegiate School for Boys. We have 400 young boys, 4th grade to 8th grade. And, you know, oftentimes when we're getting the young men, as they come into our school in the 4th grade, they're not reading on grade level. And so we spend a lot of time on remediation of these young men to get them to read on their grade level and to do math on the grade level so that we can get them ready to get into the best high schools that give them a chance to go to college. And so the thing that we found, we started the school in 2015. We graduated our first class of 8th graders in 2018, and they graduated from high school in 2022. 90% of our boys graduated from 8th grade and high school in 4 years. Half of those boys are in college now. And then our next class graduated in 2019. Those boys just graduated in 2023. 97% of our boys graduated. Half of those boys are now in college. So, no, what's the difference? What are we doing at Baltimore Collegiate that is getting those results? And I think, you know, our boys have to come in uniform, but we have a lot of men in our building. We have men there who are role models, men who've graduated from college, and then men who tell the boys, you got to pull up your pants. You know, where's your belt? Tuck your shirt in, straighten that tie out. And we're teaching them the soft skills. We're teaching them about being ambitious and seeing a brighter future for themselves. And so a lot of times it's about loving, understanding, knowing the boys, and then holding them to high standards. We just don't accept failure. We want more for you, and we tell them that every single day, and they have to say a creed, they have to say the motto, and they do it every single day. And so there's things that I believe we can do, not just at our school, but at schools all over the country that can really deal with our young boys. But I think one of the things is having high expectations for them.
Let me stay with you a minute. Obviously, the boys come to you, they're at different levels of literacy, of learning. How long does it take you to close the gap, to give them real skills where they're really thriving in the classroom?
Well, sometimes it takes it from the time that they come in 4th grade till the time they graduate in 8th grade.
Really?
To try to get them up to that 8th grade level.
So that gap is wide?
Yeah, that gap is wide. I mean, you'd be surprised, unfortunately, across the city and in many cities, boys come in the 4th grade reading at a 1st grade level. You know, and so you're now, and it's a little easier to get a boy up to speed in math than it is to get him up to speed in reading. And so, you know, part of education is when they're little boys, they're learning to read from kindergarten to 3rd grade. But when they hit 4th grade, they're reading to learn. And so it's so crucial, vocabulary, getting these boys to really put the work in at the younger ages so that by the time they hit 4th grade, now they're ready to learn. And so we kind of started our school because all the statistics showed that they were building jail cells based on whether a boy could read by 4th grade. And so we said, we're going to catch them before they are, you know, heading off to prison. So we're going to catch them at that grade. We're going to fix the problems, and then we're going to get them ready. And so many of our boys, we get into the best high schools in the Baltimore area, whether it's Baltimore Polytechnic Institute, City College. We get them into the private schools or some of the other schools that are ready to get their students ready to go to college. And I'm so excited. I just had a bunch of our alumni who've made it to college come back to the school last week. And these were boys, just like these little boys that are in school now, that can show to them, like, look, I'm from Baltimore, I'm from your same neighborhood. I'm in Morehouse, I'm at Morgan State, I'm at Norfolk State, I'm at Michigan. And they're doing fantastic. We got engineers, STEM, the number of boys that we got in STEM engineering curriculum is amazing. And so I'm excited, and I believe we could replicate this all over the country. And so that's our dream, our ambition is to perfect our model here and see if we can put it in Prince George's County, in Atlanta, in Virginia Beach. We want to spread this out because I believe we can gather a whole generation of young black boys and change the direction of our community.
You know, I admire Kimberly because, you know, she's a person that's really willing to put it all on the line. Run for office, deal with the criticism, but yet I don't think that there's nothing like public service. Now, Colin interned for us early on in his life, the best that we've ever had in our offices. But Kimberly, he went on to run for mayor of Greenbelt and won. The youngest mayor ever. How old were you when you won?
27.
He was 27, mayor. And so what is it about the public service? Does it encourage you? Because it seems that the politics and elected officials, what you see today, you see why people don't want. They think they're greedy. They think they're sleeping with each other. They think they're corrupt. Look at Bob Menendez. I mean, this is what they think. I mean, the perception of elected, they feel they don't get anything done. They procrastinate with these budget deficits. It comes time and time again, whipping people into a frenzy. People don't believe government works for them anymore. But talk about your experience and running, being defeated, lessons learned, but yet the importance of this public service.
I mean, there's nothing like public service. It's humbling, it's rewarding, it's important work. I would say that, you know, for me, a lot of it came down to some of the things you're talking about, is that frustration with what we see in politics, right? You know, the inaction, that type of thing. And so when I first ran, my slogan was vote Byrd, your voice will be heard. And so the principles on which I ran and the principles on which I governed was to say, hey, look, if you're the least of these, right? If you're marginalized, if you feel left out, I'm gonna make sure that your voice is heard. Now, the challenge is when you, I don't want to say, when you work for those at the margins, they're not necessarily those that are in the majority. They may not be the most powerful. And so there are political consequences that come with that. But I wouldn't trade the experience that I've had in public service. I'm still in public service to this day, just not in an elective way.
You're the chief of staff.
There you go. And public service is much more than working in the government or working as an elected official. It's anything you do for something bigger than yourself. So from my vantage point, you're in public service, you know, he's in public service, she's in public service in a more informal way. And so I think to the extent that we can find those issues that we see in our respective communities and do something about it, because a lot of people talk about them, if we can do something about them, right? While talking about them, there's nothing more rewarding than seeing the fruits of your labor for others, right? A lot of people talk about the fruits of your labor for yourself, right? And we do live in a capitalistic society, so we want to do well for ourselves. But I'll tell you, there's nothing, at least for me, like doing well for others, because I think that brings honor. That means that we're here for a reason. We have purpose, and I believe that type of work, public service work, I believe that honors God.
Before I go back to Alex, you know, Kim, I recently, former Governor Nikki Haley talks about that she feels that her trajectory and success would be different if she were not a woman. She said, she talks about sometimes they didn't know whether she was a brown girl or what kind of girl she was. She talked about her success. It made the big boys mad, so they attacked her in sort of a very vicious way. I mean, you ran. Do you think that kind of mentality still exists today?
Well, I think there might be, you know, it is a man's world, let's be honest. It's politics. It is a man's world. But it takes a certain woman, right? Either you're a leader or you're not, right? Either you're ready to step up to the plate or you're not. I was very fortunate to have a great mentor in my father. And he would always tell me, look, you know your strengths, you get out there and you proceed to do what you want to do and do the best job you can. And so for me, I think Nikki Haley now talking about the color of her skin, I don't know about anybody else, this is the first time I heard about her saying that she was teased for being a brown girl. So I think a lot of this is just, you know, kind of like the victim mentality that she's kind of putting out there. Like, look, woe, it's me, I'm down. I got 39% going into New Hampshire. Now Trump's at 50%. Let's talk about the color of my skin. Let's talk about my gender. These are all distractions, in my opinion. Because if you were really about that life, if you were about that business and you knew that you could handle the job, you wouldn't be talking about whether or not you're a female or the color of your skin. You'd be talking about what you can do once you're in office. And that I have not heard. All I've heard is her repeat the same talking points and the same narrative that Trump has been talking about since 2016. She was in his administration. So she hasn't even defined herself as a leader. And that's her problem.
And that is why this is your voice, your future, and we'll be back. Skit segment.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
the streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. You know, Alex Newman, I was reading a very interesting poll today that immigration has overtaken inflation as the #1 issue impacting voters in this country. It was what is fascinating for voters in urban centers in any city. They feel that this migrant crisis is impacting their housing, their way of life, the value of even in their neighborhoods. The government has neglected them and instead placed their focus on migrants. Talk about why is it so difficult for President Joe Biden to put a policy in place, whether it was Trump's policy or not. What matters is that it worked, because obviously it continues to be a noose around his neck.
Yeah, and I think the reason it's so difficult to put a policy in place that makes sense to normal Americans is because the policy that they want is to have as many people come to this country as possible in as short a time frame as possible. What we're watching on the southern border right now is deliberate. Now, I've spoken publicly on the record to the former head of ICE, the former head of Customs and Border Protection, and they told me that they think Joe Biden is trying to bring in more Democrats, right? And I think there's something to that, but I think it's actually much more serious than that. When you look at who is coming across the border, these are not just future Democrat voters, right? Congress has held hearings on this. We know there are special forces operators coming over from the People's Liberation Army of China. We know there are trained, highly effective jihadists on the terror watch list coming across that border. They're coming across the border with blueprints for our water treatment facilities and our sewage treatment facilities and critical infrastructure. We now have sleeper cells all across this country. This is being encouraged deliberately. And so, you know, when you look at what Texas just endured at the Supreme Court today, now the final ruling will come eventually, but I think we're at the point now where we have not just an immigration crisis, not just a housing crisis, not just the contribution this is making to the depression of wages, even while prices are going up. We have a national security crisis on our hands that is potentially bigger than just about anything we have ever seen. And I think it's deliberate. Secretary of Homeland Security Mayorkas has been lying about this. So they do have policies in place, Armstrong. The policy is let as many people come in as quickly as possible. They're literally using our tax dollars right now all around the world advertising for new ways for people to come here. You've got the United Nations now helping them get to the border, telling them what they need to say when they get to the border so that they'll get papers and be released into this country. This is a crisis like we've never seen, and it's going to get much worse before it gets better.
I often say there's not much difference between the extreme right and the extreme left. What's going to determine the election is those that are in the middle. They call themselves independents. But you know what's fascinating, Kim? You can say whatever you want to say about Biden or Donald Trump or George Bush or Barack Obama. no matter who's in the White House, there's certain things that never change.
Yeah.
Never. The deficit continues to loom. The poor gets poorer. The rich gets richer. They basically do the same when it comes to immigration. Republicans want the free labor. Democrats want the votes. And when it really boils down to it on what matters most, they're the same.
Yeah.
Because you ask yourself, when it's all said and done, at the end of every election cycle, what has it done to improve your life, to make your life better? I mean, fentanyl is pervasive all over this country. Out-of-wedlock births is as high as they've ever been. None of them want to talk about morality, right and wrong. They want to play to the drumbeat of the disenfranchised, the minorities. You still have people that don't want to go back to work. The reason why the District of Columbia is losing so much money because the building's so vacant, nobody's in the buildings. So it's why. And no one talks about it, but nothing changes except they get richer, more powerful, more control over your life, and at the expense of the voter. So what are we voting for when it's all said and done? What is it, do we really know? And yet we argue and fight with each other as if one candidate is going to come in and wave that magic wand and my life is going to be better.
Yeah, I mean, we could add to the list abortion and those that are pro-life, right? It's like always these same topics over and over again. And I think this is why, I will say, I think this is why President Trump and so many of the quote-unquote America First candidates are doing so well. Because a lot of these people are not politicians. Like you said, it does not change. It never changes. We've been kicking this can down the road when it comes to the southern border since, longer than I've been alive. And same thing with all these other issues. But I think, honestly, and this is what we kind of touched on earlier, we need more people to step up. And this is why I have my PAC Red Renaissance. We need more people to step up that are the average Americans that do want to see this change. Those that are not bought by special interest groups, those that are not going to listen to the lobbyists, those that are going to listen to the constituents. And I agree with you. Those independents, those moderates within, the extreme sides, they're going to determine the election. And so they have to decide, what do they want to do? Do they want to go with President Trump or do they want to go with the status quo with Biden? And when it comes to members of Congress, when it comes to the Senate, we've got a Senate seat up here in Maryland. They have to decide, what do they want? Do they want more of the same or do they want some action? And unfortunately, there are a lot of people that do want more of the same. Let's be honest. There's a lot of people making money right there at the top of the class with a lot of those that are getting all the incentives, right? We hear about the developers getting incentives here in Baltimore City. And I just, it is. There's a lot of people making money on the way things are. There's a lot of money in crime and violence. And so, all of those things are going to have to change. And it's going to have to take people like us to step up in these positions and make those changes.
In the military-industrial complex, which is the true deep state, Edwin, continues to grow. Let me focus on the media a little, because I'm a part of that class.
Yeah.
And
as I was for.
Yeah, as you were also.
And still am. But.
So you would think that over the last several months, Ukraine doesn't exist anymore. You don't hear anything about every blue moon you may see a little, it disappears.
Because you got Israel and Gaza.
That's what the media tells us. It's about Israel and Gaza. It's about the Houthis. It's about Iran. It's about whatever they tell us it's about. And then all of a sudden, Zelensky no longer matters. What role should the media play in informing, educating, and truly being the fourth estate and being neutral where they can put out all the facts and let the voter come to their own conclusion?
Well, obviously, they're supposed to be the fourth estate, and we need that. But money controls everything. And so quite often, people in media, they give way to the most powerful people, the people who put the money in, just the same way Congress goes. People with the big money sways the vote. They sway where we're looking. And I think that's what happens with media. Media is controlled by the advertising dollars that come in. They're controlled by, very powerful forces. And those forces want war to continue. Because the military-industrial complex, like you said, is a huge part of this world.
But are you saying then that the media is not necessarily about the advertising dollars. They're more focused on continuing their own political interests?
Yes, I absolutely believe that. I absolutely believe that. And like I said, and like we said, you know, things like the military-industrial complex, I believe, keeps driving war. And war is what, you know, if it bleeds, it leads. And that's what's, you know, capturing the headlines in all of media. And so it's always going to be the same. I don't know that it will ever change. I think it's an idealistic thing that we all wish would change, but I just don't think it will change.
You know, it's fascinating. You know, this will surprise you. A lot of young people that I've spoken to, surprisingly, across all socioeconomic backgrounds, feel as though when it comes to this Colorado situation, when it comes to the Supreme Court about the rule on Donald Trump's fate on February 8th, they don't believe the courts should make a decision deciding the fate of a former president. That is something that should be decided with the voter. They also believe that a lot of these what they call witch hunts, Donald Trump and all his legal woes, they see it as being blatantly unfair. Now, they may not vote for Donald Trump, but they do believe that Donald Trump had a burden placed on him by the deep state in the media that we've not seen by any candidate in a very long time. Your thoughts?
I believe that in a democracy, in a free world, people, voters, American citizens should be free to choose their leaders and not have their leaders choose them. So for the same reason that I'm concerned about gerrymandering, I'm concerned when I see the criminalization of what we might call traditional political activity, or these opportunities, this focus that I've seen on trying to prosecute and or imprison your political opponents. And we're seeing it a lot nationally. I've been talking to some friends and I'm like, who would really want to run for president? You know, it seems like the Republican nominee has got indictments coming his way, New York, DC, Georgia, Florida. And then the Democratic presidential nominee, presumptive, the incumbent president, he's got a situation where he's basically in a situation where his son is in a great deal of legal peril. And I'll be honest with you, I do not know that outside of them being politicians that there would be this much legal attention on some of the affairs of their personal lives or the personal lives of their family, and the criminalization of some of that activity, especially when you see some of the things like what we're seeing up in New York with, you know, former President Trump. So for me, it's not really so much a partisan issue. The reason I feel the way I do about this, it is the fact that I believe in democracy. And so in a democracy, I believe that voters should be able to choose their leaders. I believe that we shouldn't have gerrymandering. And frankly, you know, for the very same reason, I wish we had a popular vote for president. So all of these things are basic democratic principles. I believe in voting rights, and I think it's an extension of voting rights to say, hey, look, if you're a political candidate, you should not have people trying to imprison you solely based on the fact that they want to win an election. That's third world politics. That shouldn't be American politics.
But at the same time, I have to say, I think that the average American says that if the legal system is going to come down on us for petty things, I mean, the legal system will put you in jail for having, you know, drugs on you. They'll put you in jail for not paying your child support. They'll put you in jail for all types of things. They just believe, okay, if that's the law, and it should be fair. It should be the same for everyone. So if you have committed crimes, if you've been indicted, you know, why is it that you're going to be able to get away with it when the average person doesn't get away with not paying child support, but you can get away with inflating the value of your assets to get a bank loan? That's against the law.
This is why.
Allegedly.
This is your voice, your future. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
And welcome back to the broadcast. So, Alex Newman, there's always been this mindset that we should wait to take our Social Security, but there's a new argument that you better take it early. Your thoughts?
Well, the reality is anybody who's my age should understand there is going to be no Social Security when you reach retirement age. The federal government is the largest debtor entity in the history of humanity. There's never been any entity in all of human history that owed over $30 trillion. When you add to that the unfunded liabilities, and we're talking hundreds of trillions of dollars, the fact that even while all this is ongoing, they're demolishing the middle class, they're dismantling our power plants, they're shipping our factories over to China. The idea that this is going to be paid back is simply ludicrous. So yeah, 30 years from now, you may get a Social Security check. Maybe it'll be $750. Good luck buying a toothpick or a roll of toilet paper with that. People don't want to talk about it. Everybody in Washington wants to pretend like we can just keep playing this game. It is going to end, and it is going to end tragically. And they're already starting to do what Hugo Chavez and his successor, Nicolas Maduro, have done. Now they're trying to blame the capitalists. They're blaming the little mom-and-pop gas station or the grocery store owner. But this is going to end tragically. If you have the option to take your Social Security now, you would be a fool not to do it, in my opinion.
You know, Kim, when you talk to people, it is stunning. People that were affluent, people like to think about the poor who are a paycheck away from being homeless, cannot pay their rent, have to rationalize whether you're going to put gas in your vehicle, food on your table. It's not necessarily people that you consider to be poor. There are a lot of people that are being impacted by the U.S. economy, and they're scared, frightened. And part of this, they're being frightened, is part of the reason why, even if they have to hold their nose to vote for Donald Trump, they're just afraid of another 4 years of Joe Biden. And Trump has convinced them that he's a businessman, he'll get it done, he'll put the American people back to work. He said that the first day he's in office, the conflict in Ukraine will end. Well, we know that's not true, by the way, but you get the point. Americans are really afraid. And so a lot of what's driving voters today is fear.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's how they're going to vote at the ballot box. I think Alex brought up a good point there. People in Washington, D.C., they don't really feel as what we're feeling here, that are outside of the D.C. bubble, because they're relying on their pensions, right? They're going to get their money. Unfortunately, as you mentioned, there are a lot of people today, whether they're restaurant owners, whether they're retail shop owners, they are living check to check. If you talk to a lot of restaurant owners, especially since COVID, and the fact that they had to shut down, and they were sitting there trying to make sure that they could pay payroll for their employees, even though they could not come to work, there are a lot of restaurant owners that feel as though they're running a charity today. They haven't even taken a paycheck themselves. And so, yes, there are a lot of people that are going to vote based on what's in their pocket or what's not in their pocket. And I do believe we talk and we hear a lot about Bidenomics. Let's be honest, nobody sees this Bidenomics as Joe Biden is discussing it. And so I will go back and say, just a little bit ago, we talked about Joe Biden and President Trump and what's the difference and how President Trump is facing all these indictments. Well, I will say this. You might agree that this is a constitutional republic or a democracy or whatever you want to say. All I know is when I look at the Democrat Party, there are a lot of people that don't like his age, and I'm talking about Joe Biden. They don't like the fact that he has not done a great job and that things are worse. And so if you look at this, at least in the Republican Party, we have an actual primary. The Democrats don't even have a primary. They have already anointed the one, Joe Biden. And so Democrats don't even have a say. And so I hope that independents especially are looking at that. At least the Republican Party is bringing you options. We're being transparent about this. And that's what people need to understand. It looks more like a dictatorship, in my view, on the left.
Let me just make a note of this about the Social Security. Now you can retire. You can take your Social Security as early as 62 years old, but there's a 30% reduction in what you will actually get. That's huge. Yeah. 30%. Something you got to really think about. What are younger voters looking for, Colin? And how can either party appeal to them?
I think that, well, a couple things that she just said I want to respond to. One, we're not really doing things that much differently than how President Trump did it in 2020. I don't believe he had a primary. I don't remember seeing any debates or anything like that when he was running for re-election. But notwithstanding that, in terms of what younger voters are looking for, I definitely think that those pocketbook issues are important. Student debt is a really big issue to a lot of young people. So I know that they're really looking for that issue to be addressed. I know climate change is a big priority for a lot of young people. And, you know, healthcare is not as much of an immediate concern for a lot of young people, but I do think that a lot of young people are persuaded that the current system of healthcare pales in comparison to some of those systems where, you know, things are free. So I definitely think that young people are more liberal, right? They're more liberal socially. She talked about abortion earlier. Not a huge issue for me personally when it comes to politics, but I know there are a lot of young women that really, you know, want that to be, you know, treated a certain way at the federal level and at the state level. So I know some people are going to be going to ballot box for that. And then a lot of issues around DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. The Republican Party has pretty much taken a pretty strong stance on where they stand on that. You know, and even taking that fight to higher education, collegiate campuses, knocking down the first black president of Harvard. And, you know, there's mixed feelings about that. And then, of course, you know, younger people seem to have a little bit of a different view on Israel-Palestine. And so I think those are some of the big things that I'm seeing animating young people nowadays. But it's going to be interesting because to her point, one of the concerns that I think a lot of people in both parties have is the age and sort of the cognitive abilities of the different presidential candidates. And so I don't think there's a lot of enthusiasm about who's likely to be the nominees on both sides, but I think when it's all said and done, if President Biden stays the course, there's a lot of great things he's done around education and mental health resources that inspire me personally. And, you know, I think I know what I'm going to do in the fall.
So, Alex, there's this narrative that's sweeping the country that crime is down all across the country. Is that narrative true?
I don't think it is at all. We have a number of ways that they manipulate the data. They do the same thing with the financial situation. They've been lying about inflation numbers for decades, if not longer, and they're doing the same thing with crime data. I'll give you one example. The Biden administration was trying to make the argument that hate crimes are exploding and that alleged racists are running around hurting people, and so they actually bought billboards all up and down the highway where I live, sponsored by the FBI, urging people to report hate crimes. Now, why would they want to be doing that? The reason is they're trying to juice the statistics. So in an election year, they'll want to make it look like there's less crime when they need bigger funding, when they need more power, when they want to be able to surveil you and infringe on your rights more, then they'll start hyping the crime. So we see different manipulation of the numbers, different manipulation of the statistics, depending on what is convenient for those in power at the time. Right now, it'd be convenient for those in power to argue that crime is down, especially with Donald Trump running on a tough on crime platform and Republicans generally going on a law and order platform. And so they'll try to push that narrative out there. But I think people can see in their own experience, people have friends and neighbors and they talk to people at church. You know, people are not as persuaded by the propaganda that's coming out of the television as the politicians in Washington, D.C. would like.
Kimberly, will a third-party candidate like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. take votes away from Biden or Trump?
That's a good question. I was thinking about this today on my radio show. We were talking about this. You know, I think he could probably take votes from both sides. You know, there are a lot of people that look at him and say, well, I like the fact that he was, you know, somewhat skeptical when it came to the vaccine and the vaccine mandates. Of course, there are a lot of Republicans that felt the same way. And then on the flip side of it, I think there are a lot of people that look at him on the left and say, you know what, the fact that he seems to, you know, be a little more with it, a little more energized, right, as he was talking about Joe Biden's age. There are a lot of young liberal voters that are talking about Joe Biden being way too old. He mumbles a lot. He fumbles a lot. He falls a lot. OK, that's something that he's got to fight. That's a battle that he has. And so I think people are looking at him, RFK Jr., on both sides. But I do believe at the end of the day, it would take more votes from President Biden. But of course, that's just me. And I do want to just respond really quickly if I can. All right. Claudine Gay at Harvard University was not attacked by Republicans. She was not taken down by Republicans. She was taken down by herself. You should not plagiarize. That is wrong. Number one. Number two, you have to remember when she was dealing with what she was dealing with at Harvard, she was dealing with a bunch of Democrats. OK, there were a lot of people calling for her to resign, and they were Democrats, a lot of them Jewish.
And I defended Claudine Gay. I did. You know, I wanted to save this for last. You know, I'm an unapologetic man of faith. I believe in God. I pray. I believe in grace. I believe there's sin. And while we try to place the woes of the world at the feet of leaders and individuals, America has lost its moral way. The Bible told us that in the last days, what is right will become wrong, and what is wrong will become right. Morality and moral clarity matters. And you almost have to apologize to mention God, mention Jesus, to mention prayer. You can mention anything else that you want. Say Jesus, God. Why? Why can't we realize that there's still a spiritual illness in this nation? And it has to do with the fact of fallen man. Mm-hmm. Edwin?
Well, you know, I, like you, am a man of faith, you know, and so my faith is in God and is in Jesus. And it's been interesting. I've been in different groups recently with a group of men, and we're doing some investments together. But we open our meeting with prayer, and we close with prayer. But it's interesting because I have Muslims in the group, I have atheists in the group and things like that. And I always do, whenever I do the prayer, I say, in Jesus' name, amen. And just recently, you know, one of the members of one of my groups was like, you know, I was talking to this brother and this brother about you, and I have some questions about you. Because, you know, you and this thing about Christianity, you know I'm against Christianity, you know, and so it's like, wow, you know, you got 8 men, and I'm like the only one that really professes it, right? Yeah. And so I say, look, man, you know, I believe. I'm a Christian. I grew up in the church. I'm a Christian. I don't, you know, criticize you. I don't, you know, question you. But I believe that, you know, my Lord and Savior is Jesus Christ. And I believe that that is missing in our community, that we've lost our way morally. You know, I always tell people I'm trying to raise these boys in the school so that we could create more husbands and fathers, so that these guys will be in the house and be able to raise a family. And I think that with it being removed, families are falling apart.
Well, you could say that, and I think people should remember this in about the 20 seconds we have left. Good can exist without evil, but evil cannot exist without good. It can only feed on good, okay? Trust can exist without love, but love, no matter how fleeting it is, cannot exist for long without trust. And so, listen, you can say whatever you want to say. At the end of the day, the reason why I can smile and be in peace, because it's the choices I make to be a better person through God's 10 commandments, not 10 suggestions. Because that's what we wanted to be, 10 suggestions. They were not suggestions. They were commandments. And we're out of here.